A heavy metal door closes with a measured thud. Behind it is a corridor so quiet that even footsteps seem loud. Inside one block of Japan's largest prison, dozens of men sit at narrow tables. Not one voice breaks the silence. Heads are bowed. Eyes remain downcast. Outside this room, guards supervise every movement. This is Fuchū Prison, a facility known for strict order and regulated silence. But how did a prison in a peaceful society come to be run with such rigid rules? And what does life in this prison of silence really look like for those who serve time here? This documentary will take you inside the real world of Fuchū Prison, Japan's largest male penitentiary, located in the city of Fuchū on the edge of Tokyo. We will explore the origins of its strict regime, how silence and discipline shape daily life, and the experiences of those who have lived under its rules. Every detail in this film is grounded in verified, real events and documented reports about the Japanese prison system. Our aim is educational, to inform and explain what makes Fuchū's order unique within global prison practices, and what that means for justice, human rights, and the people behind the walls. We will follow factual testimony, official regulations, and first-hand accounts to understand this system, without sensationalism, and without judging individuals. The prison built for order. Fuchū Prison is not hidden in the mountains. It is not surrounded by desert. It sits in a normal part of Japan in the Tokyo region, close enough that trains and traffic can still be heard outside the walls. But inside, the world changes completely. Fuchū Prison is one of Japan's largest correctional facilities, and for decades it has been a central part of the country's justice system. It is known for housing large numbers of inmates, including people convicted of serious crimes, as well as those serving long sentences. From the outside, the prison looks like many others: high walls, security fencing, watch posts, and controlled gates. But the real identity of Fuchū is not built into its concrete. It is built into its rules. Because in this prison, control is not based on fear or chaos. It is based on silence. A system that runs like a machine. Japan's prison system has long been shaped by strict discipline and routine. Fuchū is one of the clearest examples of this approach. Every day inside the prison follows a schedule that is almost identical from one day to the next. Wake-up time is fixed. Meals happen at exact hours. Work assignments are organized down to the minute. Even walking in hallways is regulated. Inmates are expected to move in lines, follow instructions instantly, and avoid unnecessary speech. In many parts of Japanese prisons, talking is not fully banned, but it is tightly controlled. At Fuchū, that control becomes a culture. The prison does not simply punish people by taking away freedom. It trains them to obey. Why silence matters in Japan's prisons. To understand why silence is so important at Fuchū, you have to understand the larger belief behind Japan's correction system. For many decades, Japanese prisons have been designed around the idea of rehabilitation through discipline. The goal is not only to keep inmates locked away. The goal is to reshape behavior through repetition, routine, and strict control. Supporters of the system argue that this structure teaches responsibility. Critics argue that it creates emotional pressure and isolation. But both sides agree on one thing: the system is not accidental. It is intentional. And Fuchū Prison became one of the most well-known places where that philosophy was enforced at full strength. The prison's daily reality. Inside Fuchū, inmates spend large parts of their day in work programs. These can include factory-style labor, packaging work, cleaning duties, or production tasks that support prison operations. Work is treated as a major part of rehabilitation. Inmates are expected to work seriously, follow rules, and show respect at all times. Even small mistakes can lead to discipline. And discipline in Japan's prisons can mean loss of privileges, isolation, or stricter supervision. There is a strong focus on posture, body language, and obedience. Inmates may be expected to sit in specific ways, stand in specific ways, and respond quickly to commands. This is why many former inmates have described Japanese prisons as military-like. Not because of violence, but because of strict control over the body and mind. A prison that caught global attention. For many years, Japan's prisons were rarely discussed outside the country. But over time, Fuchū Prison became a facility that outsiders started paying attention to. Not because it had constant riots or gang wars, but because reports described something else. A prison where the atmosphere felt cold, quiet, and tightly monitored. Human rights groups and foreign observers began raising questions about Japan's prison discipline practices. Some former inmates, including foreign prisoners, described harsh treatment, extreme punishment for small rule breaking, and long periods of emotional strain caused by silence and isolation. These accounts did not always match Japan's official image as a safe and orderly country. And that contrast made Fuchū even more mysterious. How could a modern democracy operate a prison system that felt so strict? The unanswered question behind the walls. Japan is often seen globally as peaceful, organized, and respectful. But Fuchū Prison reveals another side of the country's justice system, one built on rigid discipline and strict behavioral control. And the deeper investigators looked, the clearer it became. This was not just about prison rules. It was about a national philosophy of punishment. Because in Fuchū, silence is not only enforced to prevent conflict. Silence is used as a tool to shape the human mind. And that leads to the most important question of all. What happens to a person after years of living in a place where even speaking can be treated as a violation? The rules you don't see. For many people outside Japan, the idea of prison discipline sounds simple. You follow the rules. You serve your time. You leave. But inside Fuchū Prison, the rules are not only written on paper. Many of them are unspoken. And the people who enter this system often realize something frightening very quickly. The smallest action can become a punishment. A prison where movement is controlled. At Fuchū, control begins with the body. Inmates are expected to move in specific ways. They walk in lines. They stop when ordered. They turn at exact points in corridors. Even how fast you move can matter. In some areas of Japanese prisons, inmates have been expected to keep their eyes forward or downward, especially when passing staff. The message is clear. You are not here to express yourself. You are here to obey. Former prisoners have described the prison routine as exhausting, not because of physical violence, but because of constant monitoring. Nothing is casual. Nothing is relaxed. Even silence can feel like work. The discipline system. Japan's prison system is known for strict disciplinary measures. At Fuchū, discipline is not only about preventing crime inside the facility. It is also about controlling behavior down to small habits. Reports and testimonies have described punishments for things like speaking out of turn, looking around too much, moving too slowly, failing to respond quickly enough, not following instructions perfectly. To many outsiders this sounds extreme. But inside the prison, it is treated as normal. Because Fuchū is designed around the idea that strict structure forces correction. And if an inmate resists that structure, the system responds quickly. The punishment that doesn't leave bruises. One of the most controversial parts of Japan's prison system is the use of isolation-style discipline. Inmates who break rules can be sent to punishment cells where conditions are more restricted. These punishments may involve reduced communication, reduced movement, stricter supervision, loss of privileges, being forced into long periods of stillness. Human rights observers have criticized these methods, arguing that the psychological impact can be serious. Not because the punishment is loud, but because it is silent. A person can spend hours in a controlled environment with limited interaction, limited freedom, and no way to escape the feeling of being watched. In such a system, punishment becomes invisible. And that is why critics often say Japan's prisons do not rely on chaos. They rely on pressure. Foreign prisoners and culture shock. Fuchū Prison has also been known for holding foreign inmates, and some of the strongest testimonies about Japan's strict prison life have come from foreigners. Many of them entered the system expecting something similar to prisons in Europe, the United States, or Canada. Instead, they found an environment that felt highly controlled and emotionally cold. Some foreign prisoners described the system as humiliating. Others described it as emotionally crushing. And some described it as a place where time feels slower than it should. Not because days are longer, but because there is no freedom inside the day. Every hour is planned. Every behavior is judged. Even when you are not being punished, you are expected to behave as if you are being tested. The question of human rights. Over the years, Japan's prison system has faced international criticism. Human rights organizations have questioned whether certain punishments and control methods are excessive. Some reports have accused the system of being overly harsh, especially in the way discipline is enforced. Japanese authorities have often defended the system by pointing to low violence inside prisons and the importance of order. They argue that strict rules prevent gang activity, reduce conflict, and protect both staff and inmates. But critics argue that strictness can cross a line. And when a prison becomes too focused on control, it can stop being a place of rehabilitation and become something else entirely. A place designed to break resistance. A quiet warning inside the system. For inmates at Fuchū, the lesson becomes clear early. You do not need to commit violence to be punished. You only need to disrupt the order. And in a prison built around silence, disruption can be as small as a whispered sentence, a slow movement, or a glance in the wrong direction. The prison does not wait for big mistakes. It watches for small ones. And once an inmate is marked as difficult, life inside can become much harder. Because in Fuchū Prison, discipline is not a moment. It is a permanent environment. And that raises the next question. If silence is the tool used to control everyone inside, what happens when that silence finally breaks? When the silence reached the outside world? For many years, what happened inside Japan's prisons stayed inside Japan's prisons. The walls were high. The system was closed. The public rarely questioned it. And Fuchū Prison, despite being one of the most important prisons in the country, was not something most ordinary people talked about. But over time, something changed. Because the silence that controlled the inmates could not stop information from leaving the prison forever. Reports that raised questions. As Japan became more connected to the global world, international attention toward its justice system increased. Foreign journalists, legal observers, and human rights organizations began looking more closely at how inmates were treated. They found that Japan's prison system was not built like many Western systems. It was far stricter. And Fuchū Prison became a key example of this style of incarceration. Some reports described extreme discipline. Others described punishment methods that focused heavily on control, posture, obedience, and long periods of strict silence. What made these reports powerful was that they didn't describe chaos. They described something worse to many readers. A prison system that seemed calm on the surface but harsh underneath. The problem of invisible suffering. In many countries, prison abuse is often exposed through visible evidence, injuries, riots, or violent incidents. But in Japan, critics argued the problem was harder to prove. Because the punishment system was not designed to leave visible damage. It was designed to enforce submission. This made international concern grow. Because outsiders began asking, how do you measure cruelty when it is quiet? How do you prove harm when the system looks orderly? And how do you hold a prison accountable when the public rarely sees what happens inside? The role of former inmates. Over time, more testimonies began appearing from people who had served time in Japan. Some were Japanese inmates. Some were foreigners. And many of them described the same thing. A strict culture of control that affected the mind as much as the body. They described an environment where small mistakes could lead to punishment. Where silence was treated as obedience. Where talking too freely could bring consequences. And where the pressure of daily routine could feel overwhelming. Even though these accounts were not always identical, the pattern was consistent. The prison system was not only about confinement. It was about discipline through constant restriction. High-profile cases and public doubt. In Japan, major criminal cases sometimes lead to intense public attention, especially when they involve long sentences. When inmates from serious cases were sent into the prison system, public curiosity grew about where they would serve time. Facilities like Fuchū became known as places where long-term incarceration was handled with strict order. But as media reporting expanded, questions grew louder. Was the system truly rehabilitating people? Or was it simply forcing them into obedience until release? Some critics argued that extreme discipline does not create real change. They argued it only teaches inmates how to survive prison life, not how to rebuild life outside. The international spotlight. Japan is a country known for discipline, respect, and social rules. To many outsiders, the prison system looked like an extension of that same national culture. But human rights observers pointed out that discipline can be helpful only up to a point. After that point, discipline can become control for its own sake. And when discipline becomes too strict, the prison becomes a place where the human spirit is slowly worn down. International groups began pushing Japan to reform parts of its correctional system. Some called for better transparency. Others demanded limits on isolation punishments. And some criticized the treatment of inmates who were elderly, mentally unwell, or foreign. The attention did not only focus on one prison. But Fuchū's reputation made it a symbol of the system itself. A prison that represented a nation's philosophy. By this point, Fuchū Prison was no longer just a prison. It had become an example of Japan's approach to punishment. A system built on routine. A system built on obedience. A system built on silence. Supporters said it prevented disorder and violence. Critics said it created emotional suffering hidden behind discipline. And now the world was watching more closely. But inside Fuchū, none of that attention mattered. The schedule still continued. The silence still remained. The guards still enforced every movement. And the inmates still lived under rules that did not change, even when the outside world began to question them. Which leads to the next turning point. If Fuchū Prison was built to control behavior completely, what happens when prisoners are released back into society? Does the silence create rehabilitation? Or does it create something far more dangerous? People who return to the world broken, resentful, and unable to adjust? Rehabilitation or control? By the time an inmate has spent months inside Fuchū Prison, the rules are no longer something they think about. They become something the body remembers. How to sit, how to walk, when to speak, when not to speak, how to eat without making noise, how to work without complaint, how to follow instructions instantly. At that point, the system has done what it was designed to do. It has created order. But the question is still not answered. Does order mean rehabilitation? A prison designed to rebuild behavior. Japan's correctional system has long claimed that discipline is not meant to destroy people. It is meant to correct them. In many Japanese prisons, including Fuchū, the main tool for rehabilitation is structure. The idea is simple. If a person learns routine, respect, and obedience, they can return to society with better self-control. Work programs are a major part of this. Many inmates are assigned daily labor that feels repetitive and strict, but it is meant to create responsibility. Some are taught skills. Others perform basic production work. The prison expects them to behave like workers in a factory, not like criminals in a cage. And for some inmates, this structure does create change. Some leave prison with discipline, routine, and a clearer sense of responsibility. But not everyone experiences it that way. The emotional cost of silence. One of the biggest criticisms of Japan's prison system is that it does not always allow normal human interaction. In many parts of the world, prisons are loud. In Japan, the system often tries to remove noise. At Fuchū, silence is treated like stability. But critics argue that silence can also become isolation. Because humans are not designed to live without conversation, emotion, or expression. Even when inmates are surrounded by other people, they can still feel completely alone. Some former prisoners have described a strange feeling after release. They could speak freely again. But they no longer knew how to be normal. They felt nervous in public. They struggled with social behavior. They felt uncomfortable making decisions because prison life had removed the need to choose. Everything had been decided for them. And in some cases, the discipline that kept them under control inside the prison did not prepare them for the freedom outside it. Release is not the end of the system. In Japan, reintegration into society can be difficult even for ordinary citizens. But for former inmates, it can be much harder. Japan has strong social expectations, and criminal records often bring long-lasting stigma. Even after release, many people struggle to find stable work. Some lose contact with family. Some face rejection from landlords and employers. Some feel they will never be fully accepted again. This means rehabilitation is not only about prison behavior. It is also about society's willingness to accept someone back. And in Japan, that acceptance is not guaranteed. So even if the prison system claims to be rehabilitative, many inmates return to a world that still sees them as permanent outsiders. The prison as a warning, not a bridge. In many Western countries, prisons are criticized for being too violent or too chaotic. In Japan, prisons are criticized for being too controlled. This creates a different kind of fear. Fuchū does not have a reputation as a place where inmates fight constantly. It has a reputation as a place where inmates are trained to obey until their personality disappears. Some critics have argued that Japan's system treats prisoners like they must be reset, not rehabilitated. And that idea creates a deeper concern. If a person is forced into obedience without being taught emotional growth, accountability, or healthy thinking, then what happens when that control is suddenly removed? Because outside prison walls, there is no guard to enforce silence. There is no bell to signal when to eat. There is no line to follow. Freedom demands choices. And choices require confidence. Why Fuchū still exists the same way? Despite criticism, Japan has not radically changed its prison culture. And the reason is simple. The system is seen as successful in one major way. It keeps prisons stable. Japan's prisons have relatively low rates of riots and violent disorder compared to many countries. The government and correctional authorities often point to this as proof that strict discipline works. In their view, a quiet prison is a safe prison. A controlled prison is a manageable prison. And Fuchū is the model of that belief. But human rights critics respond with another question. Is stability the same as humanity? Because silence can prevent violence. But silence can also hide suffering. A final question before the next chapter. Fuchū Prison is not famous because of chaos. It is famous because it represents a system where control is almost absolute. A prison where silence is treated like law. A prison where routine becomes the punishment. And yet, the biggest mystery is still unresolved. If the goal is rehabilitation, then why do so many former prisoners describe the experience as emotionally damaging? And why does Japan continue to defend the system even as outside pressure grows? Because the real story of Fuchū Prison is not only about what happens behind the walls. It is about what happens after the gates open. And whether a person who has lived in silence can truly return to the world without carrying that silence forever. Life inside the prison of silence, short version. Inside Fuchū Prison, every day follows the same strict pattern. Inmates wake early. Bedding is folded neatly. Cells are inspected. Movement begins only when ordered. There is no rushing. No casual behavior. Everything is controlled. Meals are eaten quietly. Inmates sit straight, eat quickly, and avoid unnecessary conversation. Even simple actions follow rules. Work fills most of the day. Inmates assemble products, clean facilities, or complete assigned labor under supervision. Talking is limited. Focus is expected. The silence is not accidental. It is part of the design. Small mistakes can lead to discipline. A slow response. A wrong posture. Speaking at the wrong time. Because of this, inmates learn to be careful. They lower their voices. They avoid attention. Over time, routine replaces personality. Even nighttime brings no escape from structure. Cells are quiet. Lights are controlled. The day ends as it began, under supervision. Fuchū is not known for noise or chaos. It is known for control. And when daily life is shaped by silence for years, one question becomes impossible to ignore. What does that silence do to a person's mind? When the gates open. In most countries, release from prison is described as freedom. A moment of relief. A second chance. But for many people who leave Fuchū Prison, release is not a clean ending. It is a shock. Because after living under silence and strict routine for years, the outside world does not feel normal anymore. It feels too loud. Too fast. Too unstructured. And for some former inmates, that is where the real struggle begins. Freedom that feels unfamiliar. Inside Fuchū, every part of life is controlled. When to wake up. When to eat. When to work. When to walk. When to speak. But outside the prison, no one gives instructions. There is no schedule on the wall. No guard watching posture. No bell signaling the next step. And suddenly, a person must make decisions again. Small decisions like where to go, what to buy, or how to speak to strangers, can feel overwhelming. Former inmates have described feeling nervous in public spaces, uncomfortable in crowds, and unsure of how to behave socially. Because prison life did not teach them how to live freely. It taught them how to obey. The struggle to rejoin society. Japan is known for structure, rules, and social responsibility. But it is also known for strong social judgment. In many cases, people who have served prison sentences face serious barriers after release. Employment can be difficult. Housing can be difficult. Relationships can be damaged or permanently broken. Some former inmates return home only to find that family members have moved on. Others discover that society does not easily forgive. And even when a person truly wants to rebuild their life, the stigma of a criminal record can follow them for years. For some, this creates a dangerous emotional pressure. Not because they want to return to crime, but because they feel they have nowhere else to go. Recidivism and the question of true rehabilitation. Supporters of Japan's strict prison system often argue that discipline creates better behavior. They point to order inside prisons, structured work programs, and low levels of prison violence. But critics argue that discipline alone is not enough, because discipline can create obedience. But rehabilitation requires understanding. It requires personal growth. It requires emotional change. And most importantly, it requires support after release. If a former inmate is released into society without guidance, without job opportunities, and without acceptance, the system may fail them. Not because they were not punished, but because they were never truly prepared for life after punishment. This is where the debate becomes serious. Because the goal of prison is not only to control people inside. It is to protect society outside. And if release creates broken people instead of rebuilt people, then the system may be creating long-term harm. Why Fuchū still matters today. Fuchū Prison is more than just a correctional facility. It is a symbol. To Japan, it represents stability, discipline, and control. To critics, it represents harsh psychological pressure and extreme restriction. To the world, it represents a different approach to justice. one that does not rely on chaos or violence, but on strict order and silence. And that is why Fuchū continues to attract attention. Because it forces a difficult question. Can a society build safety through strict control, without losing humanity in the process? The prison of silence, a final thought. Fuchū Prison does not terrify people because it is loud. It terrifies people because it is quiet. It is a place where silence becomes a rule, where routine becomes a form of punishment, and where discipline is so constant that it can reshape the way a person thinks, moves, and speaks. For some inmates, that structure may create change. For others, it may create emotional damage that lasts long after release. And for society, it creates a bigger question that still has no clear answer. Is absolute order the same thing as justice? Or is it simply another way of hiding suffering behind clean walls and controlled silence? Because when the gates close, the world hears nothing. But that does not mean nothing is happening. Fuchū Prison remains one of Japan's most important correctional institutions, and its strict discipline reflects a wider national belief in order, routine, and control. But the story of this prison is not only about what happens inside its walls. It is about what happens after. It is about whether silence can truly reform a person, or whether it only teaches them how to survive in captivity. And it is about what every society must eventually confront. Punishment can be enforced through force. But rehabilitation requires something deeper: accountability, dignity, and a path back into the world. Because a prison can control behavior, but only society can decide what kind of future it allows people to return to. If you found this documentary educational, please like the video, subscribe for more real-world prison and crime documentaries, and comment below where you're watching from. Thanks for watching.